Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle, and I am your host, Chris Angle. Along with me is my co-host, Rick Samuelson. Rick, good to see you.
And you too.
Rick is a venture capitalist on the West Coast, and he graduated from Yale, and he visits with us each week. The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to analyze the nature and essence of concepts being used in current media. And this week, the topic of conversation is radical jihad or radical Islam. So let's start by bringing up a diagram. And in the news media, we often hear the term radical Islam. In reference to the disasters in Paris and San Bernadino and previous disasters, the news media has often used the word radical and radicalized, and so I thought I'd look up the definition of radical and see what we find. In one dictionary, I found that the first definition is root or fundamental or origin. And the second definition, it was thoroughgoing or extreme, especially as regards change from accepted or traditional forms. And the third definition, favoring drastic political, economic, or social reforms, such as radical ideas. Well, I think the media is using definitions 2 and 3, and that is they're referring to that Islam is a certain peaceful religion like other religions, and that radicals have changed it drastically to another form, another political form of Islam, and moving away from the traditional form of Islam. So it's adhering really to definition 2 and definition 3. So they've concluded that Islam has suffered a drastic change from its normal, peaceful content. Radical Islamists generate terror through their radicalized new adherents, going away from a norm of some traditional form. Well, I would like to suggest that these people who are using the word radical Islam and radicalized terrorists and what all, that they have not read the Quran. Because the Islam is getting its new adherents from the Quran and from elements in the Quran, from fundamental readings of its text. So let's analyze here radicalized. How do they make them radical? Well, they do it by reading the Quran and by fundamentally reading the verses of war, aggression, plunder, booty, slavery, and more that's in the Quran. And they read these with no changes because they are the immutable words of Allah as spoken by the angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad. And these words cannot be changed. They are fundamental to the Quran. And there are and as such, there are no drastic changes when these new adherents read these sections of the Quran. It's normal text. It's a fundamental reading. And therefore, these radicals, as the media would like to call them, are really nothing else but fundamentalists. And thus, they should be called as such. The term radical is from really ignorance, or is it some kind of diversion from its inherent fundamental essence? In other words, Is media trying to divert our attention from the normal text and fundamental text found in the Quran? Or they're just ignorant of the Quran? So let me give you some examples. Let's pull up another document. I've taken some of these fundamental readings right from the Quran. In Surah 2, verse 244, then fight in the cause of Allah, and know that Allah heareth and knoweth all things. This clearly states the believer is to fight. And in Quran Surah 2, verse 216, fighting is prescribed for you, and ye dislike it. But it is possible that ye dislike a thing that is good for you, and that ye love a thing which is bad for you. But Allah knoweth, and ye know not. Thus, this verse says that violence can be virtuous. Quran, Surah 3, 151. Soon shall we cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, for that they joined companions with Allah, for which He had sent no authority. This means they're talking about the Christians, since they believe in the Trinity, and Muhammad incorrectly believed that Christians join Jesus to Allah, and that this is really unacceptable. So that the Prophet Muhammad and thus his adherents in Islam believe that we Christians have created two Godheads and thus have attached a second God to Allah in the name of Jesus. So they really don't understand the concept of the Trinity. In Quran Surah 4, verse 74, let those fight in the way of Allah who sell the life of this world for the other. Whoso fighteth in the way of Allah, be he slain or be he victorious, on him we shall bestow a vast reward. Here is the ideological and the theological basis for today's suicide bombers. In other words, if they fight for Allah, they are going to receive a vast reward, a big reward. They're going to be at the right hand of God. They'll be closer than everybody else. And so, in order to get there, you have to be slain, and you have to fight. In Quran Surah 4, verse 76, those who fight in the cause of Allah, those who believe, fight in the cause of Allah. A clear directive. Surah 4, verse 89. They but wish that ye should reject faith as they do, and thus be on the same footing as they. But take not friends from their ranks until they flee in the way of Allah from what is forbidden. But if they turn renegades, seize them and slay them wherever ye find them. And in any case, take no friends or helpers from their ranks. Thus, Muslims can't be your true friend. They cannot turn from Islam. So if they're in our society, they cannot integrate. So in dealing with the believers, they have specific references to dealing with the unbelievers and lying and telling the truth. And so let's take a look at verse Surah 3, verse 28. Let believers not take for friends and allies infidels instead of believers. Whoever does this shall have no relationship left with Allah, unless you but guard yourselves against them, taking precautions. This clearly admonishes Muslims in actions with non-Muslims. They cannot fully integrate into another non-Islamic society. And we see that. You see that in reports from Europe, and you see it here also in the attacks. They've had it and they must fight for Allah, and they must not integrate, and they cannot. And so that's why you don't see a large outcrying from the Muslim populations for these violent actions, because they shall have no relationship with Allah if they do, because they cannot take believers for their friends. Quran Surah 9 verse 3, Allah and His Messenger are free from liability to the idolaters. This means that they're free to do it. This is ethically their ethic. And Surah 66 verse 2, Allah has already ordained for you the dissolution of your oaths. In other words, you can lie with impunity and be perfectly fine in front of God. Contracts with the unbelievers can ethically be broken. Quran 3, Surah 3, verse 54. And they, that is the disbelievers, schemed, and Allah schemed against them. And Allah is the best of schemers. Muslims believe that they have Allah on their side, and hence they will ultimately win over the unbeliever, who are non-followers of Islam. So, because they have Allah on their side, and they know they can't lose. And in Surah 48, verse 29, Muhammad is Allah's apostle. Those who follow him are harsh to the unbelievers, but merciful to one another. And here is the religion of peace. If you are of Islam, you have peace. Those who are not of the religion of peace, or they're not of Islam, they do not have peace. So, overall conclusion, war against infidels and unbelievers will go on in perpetuity, because and until, as the Quran says in Surah 8, verse 39, all chaos ceases and all religion belongs to Allah. And until that time, there shall be war against the unbeliever. Okay, enough of me speaking. Let's ask Rick for his opinion of what's been happening in the news, and particularly in San Bernardino and other incidents where the Muslims have been involved. Rick, any comments?
Well, there seems to be emerging three sides to this debate concerning how the U.S. responds internally and externally. Of course, Obama has his standing policy of minimal military intervention, accepting refugees, promoting immigration broadly and more specifically with respect to Muslims, and hectoring us really as voters about the risk of anti-Muslim discrimination within the United States. I think that pretty much rises up the view of the left. They should continue doing what Obama's promoting. On the right, there seems to be a split emerging where some Republicans are now favoring more direct, aggressive military intervention in the Middle East. Broadly speaking, most Republicans are concerned about widespread Muslim immigration in the United States at this juncture. They generally promoting much more rigorous vetting. At one extreme, you have Trump, who doesn't want any to even visit the United States. At the other extreme, you have candidates like Kasich and others who are in favor of taking on refugees who are properly vetted. It would seem that the majority of likely Republican voters favor pretty stringent controls until it's pretty clear that vetting actually works. And then you have on the military side candidates like Rand Paul and to some extent Ted Cruz, who are very cautious about direct military intervention. We haven't had a good experience to date, and it's not clear that anyone has a strategy for controlling this phenomenon within the Middle East. It's an extremely complicated, grenacing situation involving countries, ethnic groups, different versions of Islam, and so it's clear no simple answer is to hand. And of course you've got regional powers now intervening like Iran and Russia in ways that make the whole process extremely complicated. I guess where I come down is more on the side of caution. I think what the U.S. is really interested in is stability and pursuing its strategic interests. Obviously, maintaining the flow of oil to the West and other countries is strategically important. Obviously, minimizing deaths, carnage, and war broadly is strategically important. And clearly we don't want potential enemies, whether they're Russia or someone else like Iran, to take advantage of this situation in a way that weakens the United States militarily within the Middle East and elsewhere, actually, that including Europe, which is directly affected by a flow of refugees that remains unsunned. I think a Republican president could immediately act more aggressively in promoting no-fly zones, safe havens for refugees. I don't think there's much we can do to influence the Sunni-Shiite battle on its many, many fronts. I think a new Republican president could be much more aggressive with Iran. It's clear that they're already abrogating prior agreements, whether it's launching missiles or undermining the terms of the recent nuclear agreement they have negotiated with the Obama administration. It's clear they're going to be a bad actor for many years to come, and that has perhaps something to do with being Islamic, but it also has elements of being a classical rogue state in a classical context, and teaming up with Russia when they need to, or teaming up with other allies when they need to, in their own interest. I'll stop there, but I don't see any sweeping, easy solution to this, and I don't think that aggressive military action on the scale we attempted under George W. Bush really could work particularly at this juncture, given how weak our hand is.
Well, we've got. It seems to me that the solutions are really to be categorized in two different areas. We've got the domestic problem where we've got Muslim violence within our society, and we've got Muslims violence internationally in other countries, and then you've got the Muslim violence in their area in the Middle East all by itself. The Sunni versus the Shiite violence there, and internationally, for example, Paris and Belgium and elsewhere. And then of course we have it domestically. So we've got three problems, and they of course deserve three solutions. So and you mentioned something earlier about vetting the Muslims as they come in on an immigration situation. Is the government capable of performing adequately uh, such a vetting of immigrants. I don't believe that they are capable of doing it. It seems that what they've shown us so far is that they're not. And San Bernardino is a good example. What do you think?
Well, the head of the FBI, Mr. Comey, has publicly stated that the databases you normally would have to even attempt any of this kind of vetting, particularly in the failed states of Syria and elsewhere, they don't exist. And so, vetting in a classical sense is not possible with many of these refugees coming out of the Middle East. That being the case, I mean, a de facto position would have to assume that no refugees would be allowed for the foreseeable future. And
so really, Donald Trump is really got the only viable solution to our immediate domestic problem.
Well, except that I think he's calling for banning any Islamic travel to the United States, and I'm not sure that's practical. Are you going to ban diplomats? Are you going to ban regular businessmen from traveling into the United States? I mean, not just for a temporary business trip. I don't know if that is quite practical. That said, there's no reason why a Syrian or an Iraqi or another type of businessman couldn't, be a terrorist and pose as a businessman. So they obviously need to be vetted. But I think with refugees, the problem with refugees is they come here and stay, right? And when they stay, they or members of their family can get radicalized over time, and that presents a risk that is really very difficult to get your arms around. And my views are that public safety for U.S. citizens comes first and foremost. We can send aid over to Syria. We can create no-fly zones and protected areas within Syria. We have the military capability to do that. That surely has to be the higher priority.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump's statement is in the right direction, and of course, it just needs to be refined so that a policy along those lines be developed. And obviously, there are exceptions, and there are you don't want to shut down everything. So, but I think what he said is heading us in the right direction. I think overall, is it not a sensible direction to head us in?
I would agree with that, yes. And if you're saying, and by the way, those Republican candidates who try to skirt the issue by saying, well, we'll find some sort of vetting process that will make it possible to take on some refugees, are really not getting to the nub of the matter, particularly when the head of the FBI says, really, there's no data to go on. I mean, it's kind of an empty assurance, actually. And so, to be honest, Trump is probably the most candid on this matter, and although he states his policy in pretty broad brush strokes, the essence of it is what we're really heading toward, particularly if a Republican becomes president.
Okay. And so, what about the Middle East itself? Internationally, should we take a look at involving ourselves more internationally over in the Middle East? There's a lot of violence there, but should we involve ourselves?
I think, for better or worse, we have now re-entered a world where diplomatically and militarily the United States is no longer a sole superpower controlling events in a way it did even 10 years ago. Other actors have inserted themselves, and removing them from their respective roles in the Middle East is not going to be easy. The United States doesn't have much leverage over Russia, and very little over Iran. And so the classical rules of playing allies and foes off against each other and using alliances, perhaps shifting over time, I might add, in a way that promotes U.S. strategic interests is probably the best we can do. There are obviously guerrilla tactics we can use to move events in one direction or another, but attempting a massive land war on so many fronts in the Middle East where there's so many problems, I think would lose support very, very quickly within the United States. And then you'd be stuck there with military assets that are stranded, and you would end up losing the war even as you're winning certain battles. So this is a very, very fraught situation for the United States. We've already invested billions and billions of dollars in capturing territory only to give it back a few years later. It's really kind of a disgraceful situation to find ourselves in, particularly from the point of view of veterans and other military people who worked so hard and sacrificed so much to gain that territory and achieve at least a temporary peace or truce in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think our involvement there should be expanded very much, and certainly not a whole-scale invasion like we did with Iraq. I think perhaps the best is to support groups that seem to be on our side, such as the Kurds, and give them materialistic support and advisory support. I think limiting the United States to that policy would be we can do on a long-term scale, and we can do some good from it. What do you think?
I would agree with that. I would go one step further. I can see instances where sending in a SEAL team or an elite unit of that nature in specific areas and then withdrawing them to achieve the limited objectives on behalf of this or lie or that, would serve a purpose as well. I don't think you can do the whole job just bombing from the air. That's too indiscriminate.
Right. And supplying the Kurds with arms that they need to be able to protect themselves and other allies that emerge. Well, we're just about out of time, and so Rick, I want to thank you for your participation and here on the Philosophical Angle, and we'll see everybody else next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.